and welcome to today's episode of Inside the Story. I am your host, Isabel Rosini. Today we are joined by Washington Times legal affairs reporter Alex Sawyer. Alex, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So you've been covering the hearings that are going on for Judge Jackson right now, that's correct?
Yes, that is correct. That has been my focus since Monday when the hearings first started with opening statements. And then Tuesday and Wednesday were focused on the nominee, allowing senators to ask her questions about her judicial philosophy and her record.
Right. So I mean, I guess my first question will kind of be, obviously Democrats and Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee are coming into this with very different lines of questioning. So maybe first, could you tell us a little bit about what we've seen from Republicans?
Yeah, Republicans seem very focused on the judge's record as it relates to crime. Particularly, they focused on sentences that she's handed down, and I think it was about 7 cases for child pornography, defendants who either possessed or were distributing child pornography. They claim that she routinely has sentenced below what the guidelines had suggested, even as a minimum. And so that's been one of their line of questioning, is whether she would be weak on crime, which is a problem that you hear from Republicans, not just about the judicial system, but what's happening in large cities across the country with prosecutors. We see this out of California cities, Los Angeles, San Francisco. We've also heard this out of Philadelphia, New York, that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah, and that's going to be a big issue in the midterm elections as well. So I know that's something that Republicans have really been hitting hard on. And I mean, even in the New York Times the other day, I saw a report about how the crime wave, a lot of people have been attributing these issues to COVID, right? But it seems like even as we're exiting the pandemic, these things aren't subsiding. So yeah, I mean, that's a super important issue. But so then
right, and one of the I was going to say, one of the things that they brought up that was pretty interesting is at least 2 defendants that they mentioned that she had sentenced to somewhat of a light sentence for what they said was the crime committed. They went into details about how old the victims were. Some cases involved toddlers. Some was, the 18-year-old defendant, but an 8-year-old victim, which they criticized the judge for saying the defendant was looking at images of his peers, saying, 8-year-olds don't really run around with 18-year-olds. So they did have a line of attack there. They mentioned at least 2 of the defendants who reoffended and actually had either a warrant out or had to go back to incarceration. So they're really taking apart this whole light on crime.
Yeah. Has there been any other big threads you've seen, or is that kind of the primary one?
That's been the primary one. There's also been criticism from some about her pro-life First Amendment record. She had signed on to an amici brief as an attorney back in, I think it's 2001, in a case that dealt with buffer zones for sidewalk counselors around abortion clinics. And she had, according to pro-life advocates, painted, in conservative senators, they've said that she kind of painted these pro-life protesters as threatening, harassing. And actually today, during the hearing on Thursday, Republicans called in one of these sidewalk counselors who was actually the plaintiff in the case, challenging this law at the time that tried to restrict where she could approach people, where she could do her sidewalk counseling. And the woman was an elderly woman who spoke very kindly about what her goal is, and it's to make sure women don't feel alone. She told stories about the impact her work has done. So they kind of are focusing on that too, on how Justice Jackson would treat First Amendment rights.
So, and then what have we kind of seen from Democrats? What has been what do you think they've been wanting to find out from this hearing?
So since the whole line of attack on the child pornography cases and the sentencing aspect, they've really played defense. They've tried to bring in witnesses. For example, today they have a president of a police organization and law enforcement organization saying, they support Judge Jackson, her nomination to the Supreme Court, that they wouldn't support her if she was weak on crime. Trying to bolster that there's no evidence that she would, quote, endanger children, which was something they asked the American Bar Association witnesses, who gave her a unanimously well-qualified rating. They said, there's been criticism from Republicans about her treatment of child porn cases, and the ABA witnesses said they didn't see any issue or evidence of that she would be an endangerment to children.
So, as this hearing is coming to a close, do you think, I know one of the main things at FreedomWorks that we have been curious about is her judicial philosophy. I know you mentioned that moments ago. Do we think that after watching these hearings, like we can come away with a better idea of that?
I don't think that there's any sort of clear judicial philosophy. There was at a moment where she kind of suggested she was an originalist, and then she kind of went back and said, no, I have my own methodology that she tried to explain about how she approaches cases. Something on this, when justices, this is my fourth vacancy to cover. In my experience, it takes a year or two for a new justice to really come into their own. So even if she were to be confirmed to the Supreme Court, which right now it looks like that will happen, it could be, not this coming term that we see her take on her judicial philosophy, but it could be even a year out of that. I think it takes a while for them to get accustomed and for us to see where they decide to go with their opinions and their philosophy, and kind of mold their own, chart their own course on the court.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I do remember on Twitter seeing there was a question posed to her asking her if she was an activist judge, or if she would characterize herself as that. That was a question that happened, right?
People have been asking about judicial activism, and she has always said that she tries to stay in her lane, that she doesn't consider herself a judicial activist, that she understands that judges are constrained by the Constitution.
Yeah, and so you mentioned that you've covered this is your fourth vacancy that you've covered?
Yes, I covered the 3 Trump nominees, and then now Judge Jackson's nomination.
Gotcha. So do you think this hearing has defied expectations in any way? Has it surprised you? Has there been anything that stood out to you in particular?
There's been quite a different approach from the other side. For example, you see a lot of the Republican senators, like I said, their big focus has been on some of her cases, her sentencing record. When I covered the Amy Coney Barrett nomination, she was a professor, so she was very, only had a small amount of time being a circuit court judge. Right. So there wasn't that record to go after, but the Democrats had brought on posters claiming that she was going to take healthcare away from children. There was a little bit more, I would say, activism role than actually looking at some rulings and talking more about that. It was different, of course, though. Also, that was 2020 during COVID. Right. Pre-COVID hearings were very different. There was a lot more protesters on Capitol Hill than what we see or hear, at least remotely in the hearing room now. It doesn't seem to be any sort of eruptions.
Okay, well, now that we're on the last day, what can we expect next? Do you think any Republican senators are going to vote to confirm? And when is the vote happening?
So the Democrats have said they're going to try to have her confirmation vote before they head out for Easter recess, which I believe is around April 8th. I think it's Monday that the committee is going to convene to discuss her nomination. My view right now is it kind of looks like each side will vote according to their party. Republican leader Mitch McConnell has come up very kind of critical of how the judge answered questions, saying that she was unclear. She didn't give too much detail. So I'm not sure if we'll see any Republicans support her. It's possible. We know in the past there's been Democrats that have broken with party. I can think of like Senator Joe Manchin, for example, to support a Republican nominee. There's a possibility that we could see Senator Romney, Senator Murkowski, Senator Collins. They seem to be the ones that are willing to side with the Democrats on some issues.
Right. All right, Alex. Well, I think that pretty much wraps it up for today, but thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, and good luck with the rest of the hearing.
Thank you.